There is a sound a heart makes when it breaks quietly. It's not a shatter. It's more like a sigh. A slow release of hope you didn't even know you were still holding. I heard that sound inside me the day my daughter-in-law, Chloe, asked me to leave. And I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that holds back an ocean. The kind you wear when you finally see the truth, clear and cold as winter sunlight. I looked at her standing there in the doorway of what I had begun to think of as my home, too. Her hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white. Her eyes were firm, but I saw the flicker in them. Not malice. Something worse. A desperate certainty. "Eleanor," she said, and her voice was so careful, so measured. "I think it's time for you to have your own space again." The clock on the wall ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a child laughed. The world went on, perfectly normal, while mine shifted on its axis. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just smiled that thin, quiet smile. And nodded. Because in that moment, I wasn't just seeing my son's wife. I was seeing my son, my David, standing just behind her, in the shadow of the hallway. He wasn't looking at me. He was studying the floor as if the answer to all this was written in the grain of the wood. His silence was the loudest sound I have ever heard. Louder than any argument. Louder than any door slamming shut. That was the moment I knew. I had waited my whole life for my son. I waited through sleepless nights and scraped knees. I waited for him to grow, to leave, to build his own world. And I always believed I had a place in it. A small corner just for me. But that day I saw the order of things. I saw where I stood. His wife came first. And a mother comes after. It wasn't always this way. Let me take you back. Let me paint the before picture. It's softer around the edges, like an old, beloved photograph. My name is Eleanor. I've lived 68 springs. Each one teaching me something about letting go. David is my only child. His father, my Michael, passed away 10 years ago. A sudden, quiet heart attack that left the house echoingly empty. After Michael was gone, the walls seemed to grow farther apart. The silence had a weight to it. David was my tether. He called every Sunday evening, like clockwork. His voice was the bridge between my lonely world and the busy, vibrant one he lived in. He met Chloe 5 years ago. I remember the first time he brought her to my little house for dinner. She was all nervous energy and bright eyes. Pretty, with a sharp intelligence that she tried to soften with smiles. She was polite, asked me questions about my garden, complimented my china. But I saw the way her eyes swept the room, taking inventory of the faded curtains, the comfortable clutter, of me. I was a chapter in David's life. She was still learning to read. I wanted to love her.
Truly I did.
For David's sake. He shone when he looked at her. He had found his person. And a mother's job, when her child finds their person, is to step back and beam with joy. I tried. I really tried. They got married in a small ceremony by the lake. I wore a lavender dress. Michael's absence was a hollow space beside me all day. I held it together until David danced with me. He held me close and whispered, "Thanks, Mom, for everything." I buried my face in his shoulder, smelling his cologne, and for a second, he was my little boy again. Then the music changed, and he was back with Chloe, her head on his chest, their world complete. Life settled into a new rhythm. My Sundays with David became Sundays with David and Chloe. Our conversations, once just ours, now included her anecdotes about her work, her friends, her plans. I became a listener more than a participant. It was okay. It was change. And change is the one constant you learn to accept as you get older. Then 2 years ago, I fell. Just a silly slip on a wet kitchen floor. But I broke my hip. The surgery went fine, but recovery was slow. Suddenly, my little house with its stairs and narrow halls became a prison of potential hazards. David was at my hospital bedside, his face etched with worry. "You can't go home alone, Mom. Not yet." Chloe stood beside him, her hand on his arm. "Of course not," she said, her voice warm. "You'll come stay with us. We have the guest room. It's all set up. It'll be easier. It was meant to be temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month, until I was back on my feet. I was grateful. Truly. The thought of being alone in that big, empty house, struggling to make tea, was terrifying. Their home was beautiful. Modern, clean, everything in its place. It smelled of lemon cleaner and ambition. I moved in with my small suitcase and my heart full of gratitude. For the first little while, it was good. It was a blessing. David would help me to the breakfast table. Chloe would make smoothies she said were good for bone strength. We'd watch television together in the evenings. I felt cared for. Loved. The guest room was sunny, with a nice view of their small, tidy backyard. I'd sit by the window and watch the birds, thinking how lucky I was. My family had gathered around me. I should have known that temporary has a way of fading. Weeks turned into a month. Then 2. My hip healed, but other aches and pains of age became convenient reasons to extend my stay. Just until you're stronger, Mom, David would say. We worry. And I let myself believe it. I let myself get comfortable. I started doing little things. I'd fold the laundry. I'd put the dishes away. I'd have dinner started when Chloe came home from work. I wanted to be useful, not a burden. That was my first mistake. Trying to be useful in someone else's kingdom. The first crack was so small. Like a hairline fracture in a favorite cup. You don't even see it until it starts to leak. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Chloe always had yoga on Tuesdays. I decided to make. To her voice. A cup here, a newspaper there. It's constant. David's voice, placating. She's just trying to help, honey. She's used to being in her own space. But this isn't her space, David. It's ours. And I feel like I'm losing the feel of our home. It doesn't feel like just us anymore. There was a long pause. Then David, quieter. What do you want me to do? She's my mom. She's old. She's alone. I crept back to my room, my heart thumping painfully. I wasn't just a guest who'd overstayed. I was an erosion. I was slowly wearing away the feel of their home. I tried harder. I became a ghost. I confined myself to my room for hours. I stopped cooking altogether. I washed my cup the moment I was done with it. I folded the newspaper perfectly. The more I tried to shrink, the bigger my silent presence seemed to become. Then came the Saturdays. Saturday mornings had always been sacred for David and Chloe. Their couple time. They'd sleep in, make a fancy brunch, talk about their week. Since I'd arrived, I made sure to stay in my room until I heard them moving about the kitchen. But one Saturday, David knocked on my door. Mom, you awake? Come have coffee with us. It felt like an invitation back into the light. I dressed quickly, a little spark of hope in my chest. When I entered the kitchen, Chloe was at the stove, her back stiff. The air was thick with a silence that hadn't been there before. The conversation was stilted. David carried it, asking me questions, telling me about his work. Chloe answered in monosyllables. She wasn't rude. She was just absent. She was physically there, flipping pancakes, but her spirit was somewhere else, mourning the loss of her Saturday morning with just her husband. I finished my coffee quickly. Well, I should let you two get on with your day, I said, my voice too bright. Don't be silly, Mom, David said, but he didn't protest when I stood up. As I left, I heard Chloe's voice, a low murmur. Thank you. She wasn't thanking me for the coffee. She was thanking me for leaving. That small, polite thank you hurt more than any argument could have. It was a dismissal, a gentle, firm reminder of the boundary I had crossed. The tensions weren't dramatic. They were 1,000 paper cuts. A comment about how I folded the towels. A slight sigh when I asked what channel a certain show was on. The way David would grow quieter, caught in the middle, trying to please both the women in his life and pleasing neither. He started working later. Small excuses at first. Big project, Mom. Don't wait up. I'd hear him come in, hear the low murmur of their voices in their bedroom. I'd lie in my bed, in the quiet dark, and feel like a child listening to the adults talk. Excluded. A problem to be discussed. I began to miss my quiet, lonely house with a physical ache. I missed my faded curtains, my cluttered counters, my own smells. I missed the freedom of being a burden to no one but myself. But how do you say that? How do you tell your son, the child you raised, that living in his beautiful home feels like a slow suffocation? That every kindness from him feels filtered through another person's tolerance? You don't. You smile. You say you're fine. You become smaller and smaller, hoping you can shrink so much you simply disappear into the walls. But you never do. The breaking point, when it came, wasn't about towels or television or meatloaf. It was about a box. In my closet, I had a small cardboard box. In it were a few things I'd brought from home that mattered most. Not jewelry or money. Memories. A few photo albums. My wedding album. Michael's old watch that no longer worked. A bundle of letters he wrote me when we were young. David's first pair of baby shoes bronzed. Silly things. Priceless things. One Saturday, Chloe decided to do a deep clean of the guest room. She asked me if I needed help organizing my things. I said no, thank you, I was fine. But I came back from a short walk to find her in my room, the closet open, my box on the bed. She was holding my wedding album, open to a picture of Michael and me, young and laughing, on our honeymoon. She looked up, startled. Not guilty. Just matter of fact. Oh, Eleanor. I was just seeing if this damp box was attracting bugs. The closet needs airing out. Something in me went very still and very cold. That box was my heart outside my body. It was the last little piece of my own private world in this shared, scrutinized space. Please, I said, and my voice trembled, a rare crack in my calm. Please don't go through my things. She closed the album carefully, placed it back in the box. I wasn't going through them, she said, her tone defensive. I'm trying to maintain a clean house. This box. It's just clutter, Eleanor. It's collecting dust. Maybe some of these things could be let go of. Let go of. My wedding photos. Michael's letters. My son's baby shoes. Clutter. I didn't answer. I just stood there, looking at this young woman who wanted to streamline my life, my memories, into something neat and manageable that fit better in her closet. That evening, I waited for David. I heard his key in the lock. I came out of my room as he was taking off his coat. He looked tired. David, I said, can we talk? Chloe appeared from the living room. Dinner's ready, she said brightly. A wall of normalcy. Just a minute, honey, David said, giving me a smile. What is it, Mom? I looked at him, my boy. I saw the man he was now, with a long day etched on his face, a wife waiting for him. The words clogged in my throat. She called my life clutter. It sounded so petty when I thought it. So dramatic. It's nothing, I whispered. Go eat. It's fine. I saw the relief flash in his eyes. He didn't want a problem. He wanted a quiet dinner. Okay, Mom. We'll talk later. They didn't talk later. They talked about me. I know they did. Because 2 days later, Chloe asked me to leave. It wasn't a fight. It was a conversation. She asked me to sit at the kitchen table. She had made tea. The civility of it made my skin crawl. She started by saying how much they had loved having me, how worried they had been about me. She said I seemed so much stronger now, so much better. And then she said it. Eleanor, I think it's time for you to have your own space again. The world narrowed to her face, to the sound of the clock, to the feeling of the chair beneath me. I looked past her, down the hallway, and there he was, my David, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, not meeting my gaze. His presence there in the shadows, silent while his wife delivered the verdict, that was his choice. That was his answer. All the small hurts, the paper cuts, coalesced into one deep, clean wound. This was no longer about clutter or cooking. This was about my place in my son's life. And he had just shown me, more clearly than any words could, where that place was. Not here. I felt that internal sigh, that quiet heartbreak. And I smiled. I smiled because crying would have made it a scene. Crying would have been a burden. Crying would have been a mother's guilt, and I would not lay that on him. Not now. He had made his loyalties clear. I understand, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. You're right. I am much better. And it is time. David's head jerked up. He looked at me, finally. His eyes were wide, surprised by my calm. Maybe he expected tears. Maybe he expected an argument he could then mediate. My calm acceptance disarmed him. Mom, we just want what's best, he started, coming into the light. I know, I said, cutting him off gently. I stood up. It's perfectly all right. I'll start packing tomorrow. I walked past both of them, back to my sunny guest room. I closed the door softly. I sat on the bed and looked at my hands, at the veins like rivers on a map, at the age spots like islands. I waited for the tears. They didn't come. There was just a vast, hollow quiet. The decision had been made. The waiting was over. Packing was a quiet, solitary process. David tried to help. He'd come into the room, hovering. Let me get that box, Mom. Are you sure you're okay with this? His guilt hung in the air, thick and sour. I kept smiling my small, tight smile.
I'm fine, David.
It's for the best. What else could I say? The truth. You have broken my heart. Would only be another burden. Another piece of emotional clutter for him to manage, with Chloe's help. I would not give it to him. Chloe was kind in a distant way. She bought me a new set of towels. For your new place, she said. It felt like a severance package. I called my realtor and put my old house on the market. It was too big, too full of stairs and memories. I found a small, bright apartment in a senior community. It had no stairs.
Wide
hallways. People my own age milling about. It was safe. It was sensible. It was a place for someone whose family chapter was gently, firmly being closed. The day I moved out, it was raining. A soft, gray drizzle. It suited the mood. David loaded the last box into his car, my box of memories, which I carried myself. Chloe stood in the doorway, hugging herself against the damp. You'll come for Sunday dinner soon, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a line in a script she felt they should follow. Of course, I said. I turned to David. He looked lost, like a little boy who knew he'd done something wrong but didn't quite understand what. He pulled me into a hug. It was stiff at first, then he clung to me. I love you, Mom, he mumbled into my shoulder. I patted his back. I love you too, David. Always. And I did. That was the terrible, beautiful truth of it. I loved him even as he ushered me out of his life. A mother's love doesn't have conditions. It doesn't have an exit strategy. I got into my little car, the one I'd kept parked in their driveway for months. I didn't look back at the house in the rearview mirror. I just drove away, into the gray rain, toward my new, small life. The first few weeks in the apartment were quiet. A deep, profound quiet I had to learn to breathe in. There was no tension. No need to make myself small. The space was entirely mine. I could leave a cup out. I could watch whatever I wanted, as loud as I wanted. I could eat meatloaf every night if I chose. And yet, the freedom tasted of loneliness. David called. Every Sunday. The calls were careful, filled with updates about work, about the house, about distant plans. We talked about the weather. We talked about my new neighbors.
We did not talk about why I left.
We did not talk about the hollow space between us. It was like carefully stepping around a hole in the floor of our conversation. I went for Sunday dinners. They were exercises in polite endurance. Chloe cooked elaborate meals. The house was spotless. David would be overly cheerful. We'd sit at their beautiful table, and I'd feel like a respected foreign diplomat visiting a friendly nation. Welcome, but not a citizen. The guest room door was always closed now. One Sunday, about 3 months after I'd moved out, I was helping Chloe clear the plates. David had gone to answer a work email. We were alone in the kitchen, the hum of the dishwasher the only sound. I was putting the leftovers in a container for them. Chloe was wiping the counter, her movements quick and efficient. Suddenly, without looking at me, she spoke. You think I'm the villain, don't you? I froze, the spoon in my hand hovering over the container. I looked at her. Her back was to me, but her shoulders were tense. I don't think anything of the sort, Chloe, I said quietly. She turned around then. Her eyes were bright, but not with tears. With a fierce, defiant honesty. It's easy to see it that way. The heartless daughter-in-law who kicked out the sweet old widow. But this is my home, Eleanor. My marriage. I needed it to be just us again. I needed to be his first priority, not his mother. The words hung in the air, stark and raw. There was no polite filter now. I put the spoon down. I took a slow breath. You are his wife, I said. You should be his first priority. She blinked, surprised by my agreement. I raised him to be a good man. I continued, my voice soft. A good man puts his wife first. That means I did my job right. I paused, gathering the strength to say the next part. But, Chloe, putting your wife first doesn't mean you erase your mother. It doesn't mean you stand in the hallway and let her do the hard things for you. Her defiance flickered. She looked down at the cloth in her hands. He didn't know how to say it. He was afraid of hurting you. I know, I said. And I did. My son was not cruel.
He was weak.
He was conflict-averse. He chose the path of least resistance, which was to let the two women in his life resolve it themselves, even if it meant one of us got broken. But that was his failure, not yours. She was silent for a long moment. The anger seemed to drain out of her, leaving something more complicated in its place. Regret, perhaps. Understanding. I'm sorry, she said finally. And for the first time, it didn't sound like a scripted line. It sounded real. I'm sorry it had to be so hard. I just felt like I was losing him, and I got scared. I nodded. I was scared too, I admitted. I was scared of being alone, of being irrelevant. So I held on too tightly.
To him.
To your home. I'm sorry for that. We stood there, two women who loved the same man, separated by a generation and a kitchen island, finally seeing each other. Not as rivals, but as two people who had both been clinging to David from different sides, pulling him in two. There was no grand reconciliation. No hugging and crying.
But the air in the kitchen changed.
It cleared. When David came back in, asking if we wanted coffee, he sensed something was different. He looked from Chloe to me, a question in his eyes. Coffee would be lovely, I said. And I meant it. That was the true turning point. Not the leaving, but the quiet understanding afterward. Things didn't magically go back to how they were before. They couldn't. You can't unbreak a vase and pretend the cracks aren't there. But you can fill the cracks with gold. You can make it a different kind of beautiful, a stronger kind. My relationship with David changed. It had to. I stopped waiting for him to be my little boy. I stopped waiting for him to fill the space Michael left. He was a man, with his own life, his own burdens, his own primary loyalties. I began to see him as a person separate from me. And in that separation, I found a new kind of love. Less needy, more gracious. I built a life in my apartment. I joined a book club with some of the ladies down the hall. I started a small container garden on my balcony. Herbs and tomatoes. I had friends over for tea. My life became small, but it became mine. It was not an annex to my son's life. It was its own sovereign nation. David and Chloe visit now. Not out of obligation, but because they want to. They come to my space. They sit on my sofa. They drink my tea. And, because it's my kingdom, I am relaxed. I am a hostess. I am not a guest trying to earn my keep. Sometimes, when Chloe is looking at the photos on my shelf or asking about a book I'm reading, I see it. A flicker of respect. Not just for the mother of her husband, but for Eleanor, the woman who lives here. And David, he seems lighter. The guilt that used to shadow his eyes when he looked at me is gone. He can just be my son again. He can hold my hand and tell me about his day without feeling like he's betraying his wife by giving me attention. The lines are clear now. And clear lines, even if they are drawn through heartache, are kinder than fuzzy, painful gray areas. Do I wish it had happened differently? Of course. I wish my son had had the courage to speak to me himself, with love and honesty. I wish I had been wise enough to leave before I was asked. I wish I had known that a mother's ultimate act of love isn't holding on. It's letting go. Not just letting go of his hand so he can walk, but letting go of the expectation that he will always walk back to you. He has his own path, his own hand to hold. My lesson learned late and with much sadness is this: love is not a place to live. It is not a room in someone else's house. Love is a thread, a golden, unbreakable thread that connects you to the people you cherish. It can stretch across towns, across years, across silence and misunderstanding. It doesn't need you in the next room to remain strong. It just needs you to hold your end with an open hand, not a clenched fist. So I hold my thread. I live my small, quiet life. I watch the birds on my balcony. I laugh with my friends. I miss Michael every day. And I love my son. Not in the way I used to, with the frantic, encompassing love of a mother for her child, but with a slower, deeper, more peaceful love. The love of a woman who has seen winter and knows that after winter comes spring. A different spring, perhaps, a quieter one, but spring nonetheless. And in that quiet, there is a strength. There is a peace. There is a home, not made of walls and belonging, but made of acceptance. And that, I have learned, is enough.